I think most businesses over index on marketing, sales, and ops, obviously, to follow through on those promises, and they under index on culture and vision.
Hi, I'm Michael Hyatt,
And I'm Megan Hyatt Miller.
and you're listening to The Double Win Show.
Well, we are so excited to talk today with our friend Brad Johnson. This is an amazing conversation.
Well, Brad is the host of the Do Business, Do Life podcast, where he explores strategies for building successful businesses without sacrificing personal fulfillment. And that may sound familiar to you because it's Brad's version of the double win. But he's a sought-after speaker, a mentor for financial advisors and entrepreneurs, aiming to balance professional success with personal satisfaction. I've known Brad for about 10 years. Megan and I both known him. He was he first attended Platform University or Platform Conference back in the day. He became a part of a mastermind that Megan and I were leading called the Inner Circle. And we've gotten to know him and his wife, Sarah, and their kids very well. And we're so excited to have him on because he's living the double win. And he's got a lot to say about it. And he's fought for it to get there. And I think you guys are going to be really inspired. And you're going to get some practical tips along the way. So here's our conversation with Brad. Brad Johnson, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here. Been counting down the days.
We are so excited because we have so much history together. And it goes back almost a decade. And I mentioned some of that in the introduction. But man, you've become one of my closest friends. I'm involved with your business. I just love seeing how you've grown and particularly what you stand for and how you're influencing other people to this day. A lot of people, a lot of really important people. And that's been just amazing to watch.
Well, thank you, Michael. I had a great example. I know we first crossed paths, well, Platform University, which then became a mastermind, which then became Inner Circle. But it was cool because it started really a mentorship from afar, from reading your book and reading some of your blog. And then it slowly grew closer, and it's been really cool to see. You've been an incredible supporter of what we're building at Triad, and helped Sean and I tremendously in the early years where it was really chaotic, ton of stress, and it's just been cool to have you by our side as a voice of reason that's been there before a lot of those situations. So really appreciate it. And same with Megan. Like I've learned a lot from her, and obviously had a lot of opportunity to interact back in the Inner Circle days. And so I really appreciate. It's been awesome just getting to run this journey with you both.
Well, thanks.
Thank you. I think what I love about your story and what we're going to get into today is we need tangible examples of people who are committed to the double win, winning at work and succeeding at life in various contexts, because I think a lot of times people, as they're pursuing this, they don't have examples of other people who've done this well. Maybe they're in an industry or they're in, a social context where nobody they know is figuring out the double win. They're hustling hard, or maybe they're not reaching their potential professionally on the other end of the spectrum. But regardless, they don't know what it looks like. And I think you've figured a lot of this out, and you are figuring it out in an industry that people might easily dismiss as, yeah, that's not possible there. Those guys don't do it. And I think that your example is powerful. So thank you for kind of showing the way and being an example that others can follow.
Hey, rinse, do every day. And sometimes, none of us are perfect at it. But I do think, especially in the world of finance, which is the world I've really grown up in business, when all you do is deal with money all day, every day, sometimes people can get consumed by it, the pursuit
Yep.
of it. And I've seen a lot of regret of people that let that chase of building a business become their life versus why most entrepreneurs start. It's, hey, I want to do this a different way. And I've seen, unfortunately, where entrepreneurs, independent financial advisors is who we work with, they accidentally build the prison around themselves that they tried to break out of. And it's really sad when that happens.
Good way to say it. I think for so many people, the hustle is just the default. They literally don't know there's another way. And so when people come along and challenge the status quo, like you, I mean, I can remember back when you first launched a podcast, and all the financial advisors, everybody in finance was saying, "Oh, you can't do that. There's too much, required in compliance, and you can't do that without getting in trouble." And you did it. There were a few people at the very beginning that started a podcast in the financial industry. And one of the reasons I think you have such a great podcast, and I highly recommend it, everybody, even if you're not a financial advisor, because Brad interviews some amazing people and he's one of the best interviewers I know. But because you started early, you developed the chops that kind of got you out in front of everybody else. Now there's lots of financial podcasts, but man, you're one of the OGs.
I appreciate that. I think you told me this, Michael. Obviously, you started a blog. I mean, you were a CEO when at Thomas Nelson when you were like really actively started blogging. And I think one of the things that holds people back from creating is this fear. Oh, what if it's not perfect? What if somebody doesn't like it? What if I suck? All of that kind of head trash, for lack of a better term. And I think you told me, you're like, hey, fail when nobody's listening or watching or reading. I mean, that's a great place to figure it out. And it's amazing. I would say doing at this point probably 200 plus podcasts, you develop this confidence where you just learn. It's those early episodes were rough. A lot of verbal tics, a lot of ums, ahs, so's. But if you're a student, and you go back, that's how you get better. You get in the game. You don't just watch from the sidelines. And you helped nudge me down that path, so I appreciate that. It really, I don't know that Triad would exist today if it wasn't for that early podcasting journey,
Huh.
because it was part of what gave me the confidence that hey, I've got value that I can add, and there might be more to this than just being an employee the rest of my life.
Andy Stanley said one time about speaking, he said, you really should watch your videos if you speak.
Mm.
And he said, because one of two things will happen. Either you'll quit or you'll get better. And
That's
if you
true.
can endure watching yourself, and it's
Yeah.
so awkward initially, you will improve because you go like, geez, and this was like a revelation to me. Like I'm literally never smiling. I look like I'm pissed off. And so, once I became aware of that, then I could start fixing it. And I still had to work on my smiling for a couple of years and still have to work on it, but I'm better at it. So, hey, let's go back to the beginning of your story because I just want to kind of give context here. And I don't know why context doesn't show up in my top 5 strengths finders, but it doesn't. But I always like context. So, kind of give us, where you started from and sort of the journey to get to where you are now.
So formative years, grew up on a farm in Kansas, true farm boy, through hay bales in the summertime, lower middle class, didn't come from much, great family, hardworking. I think a lot of that I carry with me today. I grew up in a town of 2,000 people. So Minneapolis, Kansas, most people don't know it exists. It's right in the middle of Kansas. Um, but it was kind of the golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. That's one of the things. I just heard this the other day. They call it Midwest nice now, I guess. But when you grow up and if you are a jerk, your parents know about it before you even get home because somebody from town called them and told them about it. So it's a really great filter in life to be just brought up that way. And so that was formative years. Went to college, played college football. So athletics and team sports really influenced me a lot. First job out of college, I was an IT major. Payless Shoe Source, now defunct. Their corporate office was in Topeka, so that was what brought me to Topeka. And about 3 years in, I realized I didn't want to code the rest of my life. I was coding on the back end of Excel, not very well. Loved people, always interested in finance, was, researching Google's IPO, Chipotle, Under Armour. I think they were all IPOing at that time. And I was like, I think I want to be a financial advisor. So started studying for that for my CFP. And right about that time, as I was interviewing at Ed Jones, Ameriprise, John Hancock, kind of the usual suspects there, had convinced my wife that I was going to leave my corporate job that was pretty nice. I was like 24, 25, making over 50K a year, which, I mean, this was a long time ago. So that was a good living in Kansas at the time. So I'd convinced my wife, who was teaching grade school, we needed to move to Kansas City, bigger market. And she was like, to her, I don't know how. Like, that's been one of the biggest things, is she has always been such a great supporter, and you guys both know Sarah, but I think that's an underappreciated thing in life, is a supportive spouse. And she always believed in me. And so she was like, okay, cool. I guess we're just going to live on commission only. And right at that time, you guys both know Sean Sparks, my business partner at Triad. He was interviewing at the time, what was a very small insurance brokerage firm in Topeka, Kansas. And he's like, well, if you're quitting your job anyway to go into finance, you should interview here because we're hiring. And that was my foot in the door into the world of insurance brokerage, wealth management. And day one, reading a brochure on annuities. Day two, cold call 100 advisors and try to convince them to fly into Topeka, Kansas. So that was kind of
Wow.
my training regimen back in the day. You know, jump in the deep end and learn how to swim. But I fell in love with the business, fell in love with the people. And just when you really look at it, finance, at least how we see it, other than like maybe somebody that's dealing with a health concern, like a doctor. Um, I believe money is like the next closest thing that create a lot of people struggle with, a lot of, unfortunate things when you don't have the means. And we're in an industry where we can help people put plans together that, can set them up generationally. And so it's
Hmm.
just love the business, and it's been super passionate about it and love helping people in it. So that's the kind of Cliff's Notes version of it.
I love it.
I love
That's
that.
perfect.
So, Brad, you went from working for somebody else to starting Triad Partners. And tell me a little bit about some of the guiding principles as you thought to yourself, okay, Sean and I are going to start this business. What were some of the guiding principles that you set in place to make sure that the kind of balance between your priorities professionally and the goals for the business, and also the things that matter to you personally, were not in conflict with each other?
Let's call it chapter one in finance. I think what I learned a lot of, um, so when I got into the business, I was 26 years old. I was married. I had no kids at the time. And it was kind of the grind. It was,
Hmm.
I didn't grow up with much. I think a lot of people, when they first start making money or the pursuit of it or their business career, a lot of times, if you're honest with yourself, it's the pursuit of the stuff you didn't get. Right, whatever that gap was, monetary things, toys, whatever you want to call it, the boats, the cars, all of that stuff. And so I think my first chapter was a lot of a pursuit of just go grind it away, crush it, make money, obviously serve people along the way. I mean, but when I looked up, COVID was a really big, as one of my friends calls it, scratch in the record. It, like, the party
Mm,
stopped during COVID. The regular routine that I think most people were in for business stopped. And as bad as that was from a health standpoint for a lot out there, it was a weird sort of way of blessing for our family. That year I would have been on the road. I think it was 80 plus nights I counted up, with all of the
mm,
different trainings, and we were doing them all over the country. And I was, like, transparently making more money than I ever thought I would make in a lifetime annually. Was compensated really well, had done well, had built a book of business that was a billion plus of annual assets, being driven through my clients. And I thought there was more out there, Megan, where it was like, kind of, man, am I called for something more? I'd kind of like gotten a little complacent, where I'd kind of figured out the role I was in and there wasn't really anywhere else to go. And I remember one day at the end of a day where I was on Zoom all day long, because that's how we were doing our coaching. And I was in my spare bedroom upstairs that I'd turned into an office. And my wife knocked at the door, and she had 2 glasses of red wine at 5 o'clock. And she just opens the door and she's like, "Are you off work yet?" I said, "Actually, yeah, I am." And it kind of reset to where I looked and I was like, wow, 80 some nights a year I was going to be gone, missing ball games, missing family dinners. Is that success? Is that my definition of success? I was making a ton of money. And the more I thought about it, it almost started eating away at me a little bit. Like, no, I don't think it is. Like, I can't buy that time back. There's a more valuable asset here on the line, and it's time. And we have 3 kiddos, now today, 14, 13, Braun and Nash, our 2 oldest boys, and then Nellie, our little girl, she's 8. And I was just like, "You know what? I don't think that's the trade-off I wanna make, even if I have to sacrifice money to change the game." And so for us, do business, do life, that's our version of the double win. It was kind of a selfish pursuit. Sean, my business partner, also married 4 kids. His are a little younger than ours. Um, but I remember one night, um, we had this little poster that we did with the kids, and it was called "What It Means to Be a Johnson Kid." And one of the things we put on there was Johnsons get uncomfortable and do hard things. And so
Ooh.
we would have this little nighttime routine where I would just ask the kids. There were probably 20, 25 different little sayings on there. And I would just ask for a different one each night. And that one would come up quite a bit. Hey, we get uncomfortable. We do hard things. That's where the growth happens. And I remember I'm sitting there as a parent trying to instill these lessons in my kids. And then I'm looking in the mirror. I'm like, wait, am I getting uncomfortable? Am I doing hard things? Are they going to someday look at me on my deathbed and say, well, dad told us to do it, but he never really did it? And it's kind of regret minimization. That's the way I look at it. I don't want to look back and have these big what ifs. And it just kept coming up. It would just keep coming up to the top. And this was about a 2 to 3 year journey. Sarah and I really started to talk about it. And then it became when I looked through my kids' eyes, it got so much easier. Like I was looking long-term, not short-term. No decision is easy short-term like that. And I heard it said once, a weekly paycheck is the most addictive drug in the world. It's really hard to leave, especially when it's big.
Mhm.
And that was the filter, Megan, that really, it almost became a non-negotiable of, it's not, should I do this? It's, I must do this. And I had a lot of my clients at the time, as their businesses had become more successful, they were feeling the same thing I was, where the business wasn't serving them anymore. They were serving the business. And there was a different playbook that Sean and I were both very passionate about. That's not an easy one to build. It's completely different to be a great business owner than it is to be a great financial advisor. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. And we didn't have all the rules figured out, all of the mantras figured out, but that was the pursuit.
Wow. So tell us more about what do business, do life means for you.
Well, you both will appreciate where this originally came to be. It was at Blackberry Farm.
Our favorite place.
Yes, what you introduced me to it. You took me, Michael. That was the last meeting for the inner circle. I think it was 2016, if I remember right.
I think that's right.
Um, Blackberry Farm. For those that aren't familiar, Google it and take a trip there. That's just, and thank us all later, right?
It's
That's right.
expensive. It's expensive, but it's amazing.
It is pricey, but I would say it's worth it. So backtracking. So this was 2020. Also the year I turned 40. And so I let my prior employer know in June that I had made the decision to move on. They kind of asked me, like, what are you going to do? I didn't know yet. I just knew I fell in love with podcasting. I thought I was going to podcast for a couple of years. Triad was not on the roadmap yet. Sean and I were not even planning on being business partners. Like none of this had happened yet. And so June, I told him. July, I was really having a ton of conversations because I was transitioning a lot of my clients that I'd known for 10, 15 years to other people that would work with them after I left. And that was really hard. But July was also Sarah and I's 15-year wedding anniversary. So we took a trip to Blackberry Farm. And so it was kind of a combo 40th anniversary, um, leaving my prior career, and anniversary. So birthday, anniversary, and leaving your career. So there's a lot wrapped up in that trip. And so Sean and his wife Aubrey went with us. Justin and Jennifer Donald. So I think, has Justin been on the podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, so Justin and another friend, Casey and his wife, and we were hiking in Blackberry. And it was kind of, the 3 girls were here, the 3 guys were here, so it was kind of 2 different conversations going on. And I had already decided I was leaving, but I hadn't figured out what was next. And we were just having kind of a philosophical conversation, Sean, Justin, and myself. about wouldn't it be cool to do business with people you want to do life with?
Mm.
And it was just a conversation. It was a passing comment in a bigger conversation, but I heard it said once, the good stuff sticks. And that stuck. And it was kind of, as Triad became a thing, it was kind of a really simple do business, do life. It was an easy way, a phrase, kind of a mission, a North Star to go to. And it's like, well, number one, as we curate this community at Triad, we wanted to do it very differently. So we did it differently than any brokerage business that I'm aware of that exists in finance. We took the minimums way up as far as revenue required, growth minded, check your ego at the door. We only wanted to work with people that wanted to be students and chose that they'd never arrive because, as you both know, in a coaching program, it's tough to coach people that already know it all. It's kind of really difficult. And so we're like, well, that would be a good filter. And then the third one was, what if we just decide to do business with people we want to do life with? And really our litmus test there was, would I invite them into my home and break bread at the family dinner table, whether or not we were doing business or not? And that was kind of the do business, do life. And then the other side of that was building a business that blesses the life, doesn't become your life. And that was more the structure and the framework. We call it building a business of significance. So it's got to be a business that's bigger than you, that can outlast you, which means it can't just depend on you, which is a different playbook than most advisors build their businesses with. So that was kind of the genesis story, and it's evolved a lot since then, but that was where it first came out.
We sat in this very room and you guys shared with me your vision and kind of how you wanted to be different. And I felt like I was signing on with just, I didn't know Sean at the time, but I knew you. And I thought, whatever Brad does is going to work. And I'd like to be part of it. But I'd love for you to talk just through sort of the evolution. Maybe it's a series of stages or phases that you've gone through. And I've had the catbird seat, and I could do this too, but I want to hear it from you. What were the phases that you went through from just a couple of entrepreneurs and a couple staff people to now? What do you have? Like 70 plus people in your company?
We're right just under 100.
So talk about the evolution of that, because I think a lot of people, they look at somebody like you, and you guys have found enormous success. And some people might be tempted to say, oh, well, he's just an overnight success, or he just got lucky. But it's really kind of the story of it's never always up and to the right. There are setbacks, there are challenges, there are times you want to quit, times you think that, the wheels are coming off the track. But how did the whole thing go for you?
Actually, I remember this from a long time ago. Darren Hardy did a little private coaching thing, and he was talking about what it takes to be successful. And he goes, it's hard frickin' work. And anybody that thinks it's any different is telling themselves a lie. And somebody asked me the first year of Triad what I'd learned, because in my chair, I had been in a coaching chair for independent financial advisors, which is basically an entrepreneur that happens to build a business in finance. So I had coached for 13 years in my prior role. So I was very familiar with, hey, the turnover issues, the personnel issues, the marketing, the sales, everything, like all of the different ingredients of running a business. And so I think I kind of told myself, oh, this won't be that hard. And one of the lessons I learned, it's a lot easier to coach entrepreneurs than it is to be one.
Mm-hmm.
True
So
fact.
true.
To be the entrepreneur in a classroom is very different than being the entrepreneur in the real world. And one of the things I'll tell you, and Michael, you were super helpful early on. Sean and I, we like, I loved him, but there were many days I did not like him. So he's like a brother. I met him in college, like one of my closest friends in life, and he's been there for a lot of my life's journey and vice versa. But what we didn't know how to do was be business owners. A couple of things that you told us early on that could be helpful for entrepreneurs out there. Your differences are your strengths. Our differences did not feel like strengths in the early days. We were doing a lot of this, button heads. Show your work. The other person can't read your mind. A lot of times we had arrived at decisions that we had already thought out, but the other person had no clue that what work had already happened. And this is I believe great advice, not just for business partners, but anybody you're working with, right? Just in any team dynamic. Um, Another one you said that was very hard to do in the early days is leaders are calm and confident. And I can remember an early conversation in a conference room where things got heated between Sean and myself. And we had a team member walk in and kind of like observe it's like two parents fighting basically. Right. And I remember that coaching after you told us, and I was like, man, like people will not follow volatile leaders. And so there's a responsibility that I started to learn. Like if you are going to lead and if you're going to do it well, that's actually, you're not allowed to do that. Now you can go through your own stuff privately. You can, process it there. But if you are in front of the team, that is a non-negotiable. It's not allowed if you're going to be the leader you want to be. And what started to shift in my thinking, there's a Stoic lesson. I read it somewhere along the way. I believe it was Epictetus. And I feel like the early days, the first 12 to 24 months, we were just getting bombarded. Personnel issue, such and such sent me an email. I don't like them. And I'd never dealt with this. I'm like, where is all this drama coming from? And I was getting bombarded oftentimes every morning before I even got there, text messages, all this stuff. And it was all new to me, so I was not ready for it. And then it was messing with, like, I wasn't sleeping well at night. Like I've always slept like a baby. I'd be waking up at 2 a.m. with my heart beating out of my chest. Like, did I make a mistake? Why did I do this? Did I bite off more than I can chew? And another Michaelism here. What I've learned is, as an entrepreneur, congratulations, you're normal. Like any entrepreneur that has ever been through any piece of running a business, somewhere along the way, they felt this, that
Mhm.
they're in over their heads. And what I started to realize is this is normal. It's part of the process. You're getting a bunch of new team members together. They're learning how to work together. And back to the Epictetus story, he has this story about this prize lamp. It's either stolen or falls off the desk and breaks. One of those two. Either way, he loves this possession and then it's gone. And he's processing the mental headspace of, now I'm upset, I'm grieving over this thing that I loved and now it's gone. And he said the mental exercise is act as if the lamp's already broken. So here's this prized lamp. It's here, it's intact, it's on my desk. Act as if it's already broken. And two things will happen. Number one, you'll appreciate it more while it's there. And number two, when it eventually does break, you won't be near as upset because you've already gone through what that's going to feel like. And where I draw the comparison as an entrepreneur, if you're going to build any business of substance, it's going to require more than just you. So more people, regardless of how amazing your culture is or how well you try to over communicate or all that, there's more personalities. There's going to be more conflict. It's just part of the game you signed up for. And so rather than get completely emotional or in over your head or like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I'm dealing with the new fire of the day. Now I just know it's part of the new game that I'm playing. And if there's not a personnel issue today, there could be one tomorrow or the day after or the next week. And having a process, which Michael, you've coached us a ton on, of like, nobody should ever be surprised if they're transitioned out. Here's the expectations of the team. Here's what it means to meet those expectations. If you're not meeting those expectations, give them feedback from a place of love and a place of truth, right? That balance. And just, you're there to coach and hopefully lead them down the right path, and know that some of them will go down that path and some will not, but you're going to do your best to help lead them there. And I just think it was like a maturity that had to happen, because in the early days we were just absolutely getting bombarded, and it was
Mhm.
many days we didn't think we were going to survive.
What I've seen from my seat, and this is true for a lot of people that start businesses, you guys were essentially sales professionals
Mm,
who had to transition into a CEO role. And that's very different.
very.
And I think once you guys got that, you really got on the fast track and things began to improve. I mean, you hit them head on. I want you to talk about a little bit about the role of therapy
Mm,
in all this, because I think most entrepreneurs I know, and when I say most, I'm talking 99.9%, should be in therapy because the stresses are so immense. And when you're under stress, stuff comes out. And if you don't
mm.
deal with that stuff, it will completely explode and derail everything in your life. So, talk about that. What was your initial thoughts about therapy? And how did you get okay with it? And I know you're a big advocate for it today. So, yeah, let's just talk about that for a minute.
I have a belief, to echo what you just said, every entrepreneur should be in therapy. And that's whether or not they think they need it.
Yes.
Um, Jocko, who we were fortunate enough to have come speak at one of our Triad experiences, he has a saying in Extreme Ownership, his book, there are no bad teams, there are only bad leaders.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, what I see with leaders, it's much easier to just say, it's them. Oh, the reason this isn't working in business is such and such on that team didn't do their job, or this person. It's much easier. It's easier in life to point the fingers at other people. It's easier to point them at Sarah, my wife, when things aren't working in our relationship, right? But I think a form of leadership, whether it's just yourself through life or leading a business, it's going to be really hard to help others if you can't help yourself. And if you're not really the stuff that isn't working up here, if you're not checking that, seeing what your blind spots are. And so I think therapy needs a rebrand because it has negative connotations that have been placed on it from a societal
Mhm.
standpoint for some, especially us dudes. Like, oh, that's for the weak, that's for the people that have mental problems, all of the stories that are out there. One of the things you told me early on, and this was in an inner circle conversation in that first mastermind we were in. It was one of, I think your therapist told you this after you resisted, after you and Gail were kind of having conversations, and I think it was a little more do business than do life at that point in
Definitely.
your world. And you said one of the first things a therapist told you is it's the healthy people that come talk to me. And I remember that stuck with me because I had really put you up on a pedestal. I'm like successful CEO, he's got all these things going for him. And when you were vulnerable enough to share, like, no, I don't always have it all together, married, 5 daughters. I was kind of a workaholic at the time. And I resisted when Gail said we should talk to somebody. And so, like, seeing you being willing to go on that journey taught me a lesson that it's okay. It's acceptable for a guy that I grew up on a farm, right? It's rub some dirt on it and move on. That's how you get through stuff. And so that taught me a lesson. That was a leadership lesson that it's okay to go talk through your stuff. And then when I did, and I did an episode on every entrepreneur should be in therapy. Of all of the interviews I've ever done in my life, I got the most feedback on that one. I had
Hmm.
5 or
So great.
6 private conversations of people that hit me up and said, "Dude, that really spoke to me, and I've been thinking about it, that I probably should go talk to somebody," whether it was, a spousal thing or whether it was just like the stresses of running a business. Um, and I made a lot of referrals to my therapist, Megan, because most people know they're probably like, I really probably should work through this, but there's a resistance there for some reason. And so if anybody's listening to this right now, don't resist it. Like, it's, to me, the way I frame it, it's just another form of coaching. Like,
Yeah.
Yep.
we go get a golf coach, we go get a business coach, we go get a trainer at the gym, like all of these other areas in life of top performers, they get coaching in every other aspect of their life. But the one that's most important, the space between your ears, they don't get coaching on, or the relationship, their marriage, they don't get coaching on and somebody to help them sort through it and give them better frameworks to deal with stuff. And it's just kind of silly to me. So it's kind of my
Thank you for
my
sharing
soapbox
that.
approach on therapy there.
I think it's so helpful to hear somebody in your position and stage of life share that because I do think it gives other people permission. Like we were talking about at the very beginning, we need examples of the double win or of doing business and doing life with real people that we can relate to who have all the same struggles we do. And I think this, again, is instructive to that end because the truth is, I think a lot of times, especially in the age of social media, the way that success is perceived is a highlight reel. It's all the wins, it's the, reels of somebody on stage, it's the great outfits, it's the trips, it's the people they got to meet, and it just looks like it's charmed and magical. And for whatever reason, we just don't talk enough about the hard parts of it. And it's interesting. I was speaking last week at Don Miller's Business Made Simple summit that he does. And I was talking about kind of like when I became CEO, how I thought success worked and
Mm,
how it actually works. And I really went in thinking success is a formula.
mm,
And if you just do it right, in air quotes, if you just do it right, then you won't have any problems. It's really a game of A plus B equals C equals no problems. And if you have problems, it means that you're failing. And like all these other people that don't seem to have any problems, they know something you don't know. They're doing it better. And I think that was so unhelpful for me, and it created so much shame and anxiety. And it really held me back until I realized, no, like problems are the status quo. You will always have problems. This is not a perfect world, and hopefully your problems get better as you become
yeah.
more successful. Some of them get harder, some of them get easier. And it's not really about eliminating problems. It's about being a person who can better deal with the problems with more wisdom, more self-compassion, compassion for others, et cetera, resilience. But I'm curious for you, Brad, what did you think before you started Triad, or maybe at the very beginning? What did you think the formula for success was? And what would you say that you understand it to be now?
Mm. Well, what you just shared resonates a lot with me. So I like to game. I've got two boys, a 14, 13-year-old. So that's like father son time now. My wife gives me a hard time. She's like, oh, yeah, father son time. So you can play video games with the kids. I get it. But I think video games are an interesting analogy. First off, my first chapter was kind of single player game.
Uh-huh.
And when Sean and I started Triad, we switched to a multiplayer game, much more complexity. And Michael, I heard you say it. One of the early Triad experiences, you said your impression of a lot of financial advisors out there, their businesses built on personalities. And I think what's interesting, a lot of charismatic leaders, when it's kind of a small business and it's them, they can get away with some stuff, right? It's like, oh, I'll just kind of talk my way through this problem that presents itself, but it's a single player game. And so as you start to scale a business and now it's a multiplayer game, the complexity starts to go up. So like back to what I shared earlier, like the complexity had gone up. Now I had a business partner. Now we were building a team. And now these new like levels in a video game. Wow, that level 1 was really easy. I can pass that with my eyes closed. Oh, boom, I just unlocked level 2. Now I keep getting stuck. And so what I've seen as the business has grown, I heard a business coach say businesses break at 15 people, 75 people, 150 people. And what she was saying is kind of there's different complexities that present themselves at different team sizes. And we had a lot breaking at 15. We were now expanding past being able to do an all company meeting in one conference room. So now we were
Mhm.
starting to develop divisions with new complexities. Now we have to grow leaders. And so like that's kind of how I think about it in my mind, Megan, is it's almost like you're playing a video game. Simon Sinek's thought process is if you're playing the infinite game, the rule is you don't want the game to ever end. You just want to stay in the game versus the finite game of play 4 quarters and the game's over and here's the score. And I think a lot of business owners, they kind of do this annual goal setting where it's like they're playing the finite game. And at Triad, we're trying to really play the infinite game, which is if you're truly have a pursuit of helping our team and our Triad members do business and do life, at what point is business too good or life too good if you actually integrate those two so they serve each other? So to me, it's the infinite game that ideally we just keep playing and evolving. And then as you're unlocking these different levels of the video game with more complexity, some of those problems get easier because, oh, we've solved that one 5 times before. No problem. We have a great framework. And sometimes it's like, oh, shoot, new problem. But hey, if we're solving the same problem we were a year ago, we're not evolving and progressing as a company. So that's kind of my framework. I don't know if that's like my mental hack to get through those when they present themselves,
Yeah.
but I've just kind of said, oh, it's a new game as an entrepreneur and I'm going to have to solve new problems as this thing evolves.
Well, here's what you said that I love is that what I take away from that is the meaning behind the problems. So in my world, when I was kind of unconsciously, I had this assumption that if I'm doing it right, there won't be any problems.
Mm,
Problems meant failure to me. That was a judgment on my leadership that there were problems, and how successful I was determined by how few problems or how many problems I had. What I hear you saying is, in some ways, the challenge is the reward for going to the next level. Just like if I'm in the gym and I'm doing squats or bicep curls, my goal is not to curl 10 pounds for the rest of my life. My goal is to progressively
yes.
overload and get stronger so those little fibers tear and they get stronger and stronger. And so if I'm lifting the same weight that I was a year ago, that's actually a negative reflection on me. If that's easy, if it's challenging, it means it's because I'm growing, and so that I think that's a really helpful reframe, just around the meaning of what are problems.
Okay, let's imagine for a moment that somebody is listening to this podcast, and maybe they're caught on the hamster wheel of hustle, and business is consuming way more of their life than they think it should, but they don't know how to get off of it because that's kind of the default. They just assume that there's no other way. And I'm sure you've got clients that you've brought on at Triad that are in this exact situation, but they're attracted to you because they see a different kind of future, a different possibility for a different kind of future. What would you say, and how do you coach them? How do they regain their life without just basically letting go of their business and either retiring or settling for less than what they're capable of?
Well, that is a very, very big issue in finance, the hamster wheel, because most people in our industry grew up in a business that it kind of the story I said, like jump in the deep end and it's like hope you don't drown. A lot of people drown in finance. Like a
Mm.
lot of advisors, when they get into this business, they'll have a class of like 20 or 30, and it's typically recruit them right out of college. And it's like grind, like, go do the sales deal, knock on doors, cold call, any more social media prospecting, all of that. And so it's survival of the fittest, which actually teaches you a lot of bad habits
Mhm.
because it's market, sale, market, sale. And so the hamster wheel, at first, they have all the time in the world because they have no clients. And then if they start to have success, it's because they went out, they were grinding, they were marketing, 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 manufacture the appointments, make the sale. And now they look up a couple of years later and they're like, this wheel's going so fast, I can't get off.
Mhm.
And so Ryan, one of the coaches on our team, he said this one time and it really hit with me. So we call that the red line of burnout. Um,
Mm.
Sean, my business partner, wrote a book, The Advisor Transformation, that like he talks about a lot of this if anybody wants to go deeper on it. But the red line of burnout, the way we look at that, and I think it applies to a lot of business, it's this hamster wheel of market, sell. And it's just like this flywheel effect of all I do is run faster, 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 and I have less time at the end of the day. Almost like a victim of your own success. And we call it the green line of significance is building a business in a different way that's bigger than you, that actually empowers more team members. So it's going from a great salesperson to a great business owner to a great CEO. You mentioned earlier, Michael, like we were salespeople that then had a different rule book to play by if we wanted to build a business. And so I think the first thing, you wrote a book on it, Vision Driven Leader. It's going to be really hard to build a business bigger than yourself if you don't have a North Star that your team is headed toward collectively. And I do think that was one of the things we did fairly well in the early days of Triad. Now that has evolved and shifted as we've learned a bit, but we did truly want to build a business that not only blessed our lives, but also our members' lives. And so there was pieces of that playbook we already knew, but we also figured a lot out because as we would work with new people, new problems would arise. We're like, oh, cool. If we want to get there, we've got to, adjust that. And I think the biggest thing, and this isn't an easy answer, but I think most businesses over-index on marketing, sales, and ops, obviously, to follow through on those promises, and they under-index on culture and vision.
Mm,
Mhm.
Because
agreed.
the team is fragmented, they don't know where they're headed, and then they don't focus enough. Bill Self said it. So the coach of the KU Jayhawks won a few national championships. He said this. He said, "My most talented teams have not won the national championships." Like if you look at just sheer raw talent, I've had more talented teams that did not win national championships. My teams that won the national championships were the teams that had good talent, but they played the best together. And I think that's a great analogy for culture. You can have incredibly talented people, and we've had like 10 out of 10 skill set people that were ones or twos on culture, and it was an absolute disaster. It was a cancer that spread within the business. And the moment we didn't do this well early on, but we've gotten better with time. The moment we see people are not a culture fit, it's start to try to course correct that. Hey, here's where you're falling short. Here's a blind spot. Pour into them, coach them. But if they can't get on board culture wise, it's always an ugly ending if you don't get them off the bus. And so I'd say that's the biggest thing is if you want to build a business bigger than you better focus a ton on vision, a ton on culture, and the rest, obviously, you've got to do that too, but those are the two that matter the most, in my opinion.
Let me just follow up to that. What would you say to a leader who's not the founder, not the owner, but maybe they're running a department or division, kind of like you were in your prior job, where maybe you don't have as much discretion and you're trying to operate in that culture, but you don't want to just, you know, cave into the demands of the hustle culture, but you've also got to keep your job. What would you say to those people?
I think it's harder if you're not the founder, entrepreneur, but not impossible. I mean, part of it depends on the business and the autonomy you're given as a leader. But one of the we do this thing at Triad. We call them Triad bad words, Triad curse words. And I think back to culture, you can create a culture on a team, even if it's a microcosm of the bigger organization. And one of the things I've found, like it started as kind of a joke, almost like a tongue in cheek sort of joke. Where like at Triad, we don't do events, we do experiences. And
Mm.
what we thought about is what we wanted to create. So Covey's 7 habits start with the end in mind. Okay, what are we trying to create? We're trying to create experiences where our members come together and have massive breakthroughs, life-changing things that they look back and they're like, wow, those 2 days changed my business trajectory. They changed my life trajectory. Okay, so what is that? That's like a life-changing experience. That's not an event. An event is you go to a hotel and it's forgettable and it all blends together. And you're like, I've been to hundreds of events, if you've been in business a certain number of years. And so one of the ways we started to create that, which I think could apply to somebody running a team that's not necessarily the entrepreneur or the owner, is start to look at the words you use and the language. And we say language creates. I know we have a mutual friend in Chris Smith.
Mhm.
He's big on this. And we started to craft language inside of Triad that spoke to who we wanted to be, even if we weren't quite there yet. Um,
Mm.
we want leaders. We don't want managers or bosses. Boss is a bad word. Oh, who talks like, oh, I love my boss. That's like a king on a throne. People want leaders. Hey, I'll follow a leader, but a boss or a manager, and I know some of those terms you have to just use in business, but we started to create language around who we wanted to be, and that has really influenced the culture. I heard another one, a new one the other day is this was the Savannah Bananas. Jesse Cole, I think, is the owner there. He said, "We don't train here. Training's for dogs. We coach. Humans get coached, dogs get trained." I thought that was a really good
Ooh,
one.
that's fantastic. I
Yeah.
love that.
Megan, don't forget what you're going to say, but just to follow up to
Yep.
that, one of the things I've been saying to my coaching clients a lot, and I've said it to you guys, is that, as a leader, it's important to see yourself as a coach
Mm,
because people are not there, to just for somebody for you to offload stuff to that you don't want to do. Now, that's part of it. That's delegation. I get that.
right.
But, I feel like my job, I'm a steward of those people, and my job is to coach them to greater levels of performance so that they realize their potential. And that's a
Ex
completely different mind shift. And my friend Daniel Harkavy has written a book on that called Becoming a Coaching Leader, which I really, really value. In fact, we have a mastermind group, subset of Triad, and you were in the meeting, Brad, with me earlier this week. And I recommended that book. And I think for a lot of people, that's a major paradigm shift to see yourself as a coach when you're really leading. And Arthur Brooks says, now we got this big thing about coaching. He said, we used to call that a leader, but it's the same thing.
Mm. Well, I'll piggyback you, Brian Miles, which was another intro you made.
Ah,
So, former CEO of Belay, him and his wife, Shannon, and he told me a story back to, you said something, stewardship, I think is a really important idea as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a CEO. It was when he had first, a year or two into Belay. So he'd left his corporate job to go start the business. And he was like climbing a mountain with some CEO friend. He didn't tell me the name, but it was some guy that had been super successful, publicly traded company, and had retired. Might have been you, Michael. I don't know. But anyway, he said he was on the side of this mountain, and he said, "Yeah, I really am. I'm fortunate to own my business." And this CEO friend said, "You don't own your business." And Brian's like, "What do you mean?" "Yeah, that's why I quit my job. I own the business." He's like, "No, you own the business when you're not required to be there and show up to work. That's when you truly own the business. Right now, you're working in the business." And out of that story, what came of it is, he said, as CEO, I look at this now as a stewardship. I have a season of where I'm steering the ship, but someday that season will be gone and I will pass it to the next in line. So I think if you're going to build a business bigger than you have to change your mentality of, this is my business. I
mm,
own it. I'm the CEO. And that's kind of like ego driven for a lot of people I've seen. And if you flip it and you say, I'm just a steward here to serve the team and steer this business to the best of my ability with all the help I can get, and someday that season will be over, it actually completely shifts that ego driven nature that I think a lot of times gets a hold of CEOs. And so I look at it as a season of stewardship, and I hope that season's really long. But if someday I'm not able to steer the ship, or Sean's not able to steer the ship to the best of his ability, it will be time for the next in line.
I think there's something about stewardship that's just inherently about humility. And it's inherently connected to a reckoning with our mortality, with our the finite nature of our own abilities and expertise, and humanity in general. I think that's a really important concept. I know in my own set of personal values, not our company values, although it is a company value as well. um, I say stewardship is a value, and what it means to me is that I increase the value of who and what has been entrusted to me. And I think that it changes how I approach stuff. I think about my kids, and this is like an easier example sometimes to understand. It is faster and easier and less frustrating for me to do a lot of stuff myself than to let my kids do it. And yet, like, I have Naomi, our 5-year-old, oftentimes at the counter helping me with something with dinner, and it's my spiritual work to breathe my way through that, because I'm kinda like, I just would like to do it myself and
Right.
have the quiet and whatever. And yet, that at that moment, it's not just about making dinner, for example. It's about growing her and giving her the opportunities to learn and connect, of course. But I think that's true in our businesses as well. It takes more time, and it can be frustratingly slow to work on that process of what our mutual friend Ian Cron calls growing fruit on other people's trees. It's just easier to grow fruit on your own tree where you have
Mhm.
total control of it, but it's not nearly as rewarding, and it sure doesn't last. So
so
I
true.
appreciate you bringing that idea up.
That's what chapter 2 has been to me. We talked about chapter
Hmm.
1 earlier. It was kind of a
Yeah.
single player game. I had a small team that I cared deeply about. Wish I could have brought them all with me. That's not how business works though. And chapter 2, one of the most rewarding things, I'm now 44. Um, and now there's 20 I can think of, like Colin on our team. He's 24, and just pouring all of those lessons that I kind of learned through the school of hard knocks. I'm like, well, don't do this, don't make that mistake, do this instead. It is so rewarding um, to be able to grow fruit on other people's trees. And uh, one thing that it reminds me of, Don Yeager, who's an author out there. He was a podcast guest too. He had the chance to mentor under John Wooden, and I've kind
Mm,
of this is kind of my litmus test on stewardship or leadership. So he mentored under John Wooden for a number of years, and this was like 85, 90-year-old John Wooden. And his rule was he'd have to fly out, I think, once a quarter, have all his questions, and then John Wooden would make the time for him. And it was towards the end, he was in his upper 90s. It's like, this might be the last time I see him alive. And he told Coach Wooden, I feel like every time I leave your presence, I'm a better man.
mm,
And Wooden's response, instead of thank you or, well, it's really been a great, mentorship or whatever, he said, you should make that your standard. And I look at that as leadership and stewardship. If I walk into a room in business or in life, when I leave, did people get better because I was there? Did I level them up? Did I pull the best out of them? Or was it neutral or worse? And, if you're real with yourselves, I think we all have those regrets of like, oh, I said that thing I shouldn't have said. But it's a really cool standard in leadership and stewardship to hold yourself to. Is like, did that room get better because I was in it?
hmm
So
I love
good.
that.
Okay, Brad, I just want to say this. I think you need to write a book.
I was thinking the same thing.
And we need to have a conversation about that. As a former publisher, I could probably help you with this. But we would have you back on and promote the heck out of it because I think you're such a student of life and you're so eager in your learning and so humble about it. And I just think there's so many life lessons that you've gathered already at, from my vantage point, a relatively young age, that, it's time. It's time.
Well, there was once a guy that said I should start a podcast, and that worked out okay. So I should probably just take your advice on that. I'm humbled by that, Michael. Thank you. I've learned so much from you, and so and that's
Well,
I came into our relationship really like, oh, this will be great for business, and it was, but it was exponentially more valuable in life. I'm a better
Mm.
wow.
husband. I'm a better dad today because of a lot of the lessons you shared. So I really appreciate that. And Megan, I've learned a lot
Well.
from you too. Just I haven't done coaching directly with you like I have Megan. So, but yeah, it's been incredible. I'm a better version of myself because of you. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mm.
That means the world to me. Well, we have 3 questions that we like to ask at the end of every podcast. These aren't trick questions, but this is kind of a lightning round. I think you do the same thing on your podcast, right?
Yeah, I was kind of inspired by Tim Ferriss, kind of the lightning bolt
Ah,
questions at the end.
yeah. First question, Brad. What is the biggest obstacle for you right now in getting the double win?
I think the biggest thing is we continue to scale at Triad. There's a lot in place. I think there's some easy ones that have helped me. Having an executive assistant, Brooke, in my life that has been incredibly powerful in just managing my calendar. So I put the top priorities at the top, which for me is family before anything else. Um, but I think as Triad grows and scales, we're in a phase now as we reach around 100 team members where we're really growing divisions that need true leaders. And so I'd say the biggest thing getting in the way is hiring great talent and
Mm,
adding them to the team. And so I've kind of switched my thought processes. We're always in the pursuit of great talent, like a sports team. If there was a great person on the market and you had a gap on the team for that role, you would always be in talent acquisition if you're going to win championships. So that's kind of the way I look at it at Triad is we're always looking to hire incredible talent that fits obviously the roles we're trying to fill as we grow.
yeah.
The second question is how do you personally know when you've got the double win?
I think too often in life, business and life, or the double win, it's a tug of war. It's in order to be successful in business, I have to sacrifice life. In order, oh, I really want to show up as a better husband and dad. Okay, well, let's just kind of go status quo on business for a little bit and just kind of coast while we focus more on life. So it's a tug of war or a teeter totter where you give up one to get the other. And what I've tried to do is just integrate to where, good example, there's a Chicago trip for Triad to go up there. And so I check with Sarah. I'm like, hey, You want to do a weekend trip to Chicago, couples trip? You want to take the kids? What do you think? We could fly up on a Saturday, Sunday. I'll do a business meeting on Monday. So there's no rules that say you can't do that. One of the reason our founders retreat, we call it the DBDL Founders Retreat. Most entrepreneurs, I think, number one, we filtered our community for pretty good humans. So I find great humans actually want to be good spouses or good parents. And so if you just set up the formula where you can do both, our founders retreat's amazing. We have more kids there than we do adults, and it's an absolute blast. And so you
Amazing.
can actually accomplish both. There's no rule that says you can't if the
Yep.
format is right.
That's awesome. Okay, last question. What is one ritual or routine that you rely on to do what you do?
So there's a book that really hit me pretty hard. Peter Bartlett, I'm trying to remember the name, Not Fade Away was the name of it. And so
Hmm.
this was a guy wrote it like in his last year of life. He was a super successful TV exec. I think he like helped create BET and like some of the networks that used to be really big, but he came down with terminal cancer. And so it was like the last year of his life. He was a parent. He'd done some really big business things, but there was a quote in there. He said, "You can make all the dough in the world, but if you sacrifice your health in the pursuit of that, you're cutting yourself a really lousy deal."
Mm,
And I see a lot of people in a pursuit of money sacrifice everything else, marriages, health, their personal health, like go down the list, addictions that come with that, alcoholism, drug use, infidelity, and they're over indexing on one thing and leaving the rest behind. And so back to like, I've really found when I'm at my best version of myself, I feel good about my health. I'm hitting the gym in the mornings. I'm eating fairly clean. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, like, we've got one body in this life. You better take care of it. You can go make all the money in the world, but if you're not around to enjoy it, you're kind of focusing on the wrong thing. So that's the one that I really try to. And Sarah's the same way. We try to instill that in our kids, that just, live a healthy lifestyle, work out, stay active.
I totally
that's
agree.
great.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much. This has been a great interview. I feel like we could have talked for another couple of hours, but Joe Rogan's got the patent on the 3-hour
He's got the
podcast.
long form covered. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But thanks, man. I mean, you're such a great friend. And I just admire you and Sarah, what you've built, what you've created, what you and Sean have created. It's inspiring, which is why you need to write a book.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that more.
We'll add that to the list. Appreciate it. I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks, Michael. Thanks, Megan. Love every conversation we ever have.
Great.
Thanks, Brad.
See you soon.
All right. Till next time.
Okay, so that was fun.
That was really fun. Like you said, we've known Brad for a long time, and you now work with him very closely, Brad and Sean, his partner. But I just find him so wise and humble and thoughtful, which I think we need more of that in the world of business, and a
Mhm.
lot less like, chest pounding bro culture, for lack of a better way to say it, where everything seems like it's all up and to the right.
Well, the other thing too is, and I've noticed this with my coaching clients, the ones that get the best results, because I coach how I coach, and
Yeah.
there's some disparity in the results.
Yeah.
But I can point to the fact that my 3 biggest clients, and when I say biggest clients, I'm talking about coaching clients that have businesses that are exploding and lives
Mhm.
that are really balanced, are also
Mhm.
the most humble and teachable.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, if I
Yes.
suggest something, like, they probably shouldn't even do this, but, like, they write it down and they're on it. They're doing it. And then, occasionally get some clients that are a little bit more resistant, kind of think they have it figured out, and they just don't see the results because they're not personally growing at the rate
Yeah.
they need to.
It's funny. We have told our kids, Joel has told our kids for many years that he has this little saying. He says, knowledge is the enemy of learning.
Yes.
And it's like, you see this, it's so obvious in kids, but like, when they think they're experts at everything, then they can't be open to new ideas and grow. They're really holding themselves back. And I think that's just as true in business as it is in raising kids. I think it's a good lesson for all of us that when we're willing to be humble, question our assumptions, be open to outside feedback, that's when we really grow.
Yeah, I agree. Well, there's so many takeaways from what
Hmm.
Brad said, and he was so pithy in saying them. But I think, sort of the wisdom he saw and his vulnerability in sharing the challenge they faced as they grew as a
Hmm.
business, and that you have to continue to play a different game because at different levels, the rules change. And it's a completely different game and it's more complex and all that. But, I've had the opportunity to watch them front row seat to see them navigate through that. And, it's always
Yep.
initially rocky and has been for us too, but they just hang in there and make it work. And I think,
Yeah.
I don't know what level they're in now in their growth, but if I told you the numbers, and I'm not going to tell the numbers, but you'd be astonished. Uh,
Yeah.
the level of business that they've been able to do in 4 years.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. And I loved that reframe. I think that was my biggest takeaway from the conversation, that reframe around problems as being really challenges that are the result or the reward for our success. And it just means you've gone to another level. I think it's easy to forget that the most successful people are probably as far as they've ever been. And that's true for somebody like Tim Cook or Jeff Bezos. And that's true for you and me and everybody else. It's like, yes, we bring relevant experience, hopefully, to the table, but in some way, shape, or form, in ways big or small, we are all as far as we've ever been, which means we're all learning, we're all making mistakes. And we have to be okay with that. If we expect to do it perfectly, the only way we could do it perfectly is to do the same thing over and over and over
Mhm.
again until you get to a level of mastery that you can kind of do it in your sleep, but you're probably not growing a whole lot at that point. So it's really a good thing.
One of the things, well, unfortunately, we didn't get to spend much time on, Brad mentioned it in passing, but is the importance of culture. But I can tell you, as being part of his culture and observing it, that's like their number one thing. They have put the cult back in culture, and I mean that as a
In a good
compliment.
way, not a creepy way, in a good way.
But seriously, I mean, they have such raving fans, and whether it's their employees or it's their clients, because I go out to all these amazing experiences that they create. And they just it's something bigger than business. It's like a
Yeah.
movement. And I've come back and shared with you after I've attended their experiences. I said, what I really want to do with full focus and with the double win idea, to me, it's about creating a movement. I'm not here just to sell more products or sign up more clients. What I'm here is to start a movement that changes the way that at least Americans, but probably internationally, about the difference in the way we think about business. And
Mhm.
Brad's inspired a lot of that. He and Sean are living that and demonstrating it in an extraordinary way that's very inspirational.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, that's the kind of thing people wanna be a part of. If you're really serious about attracting top talent, it can't just be a financial opportunity or, a bigger opportunity of some kind. It's gotta meet some deeper need, and I think that's what he's really figured out how to do in a very authentic way that has a lot of integrity, and I think that's a big secret to why they've been able to be as successful as they have been.
And I love that he's done it in an industry where it's not done.
That's right.
And where the status quo is, like the opposite of this. Because what a lot of people don't know about financial advisors is they are hardcore salespeople. It's a very
Mhm.
sales driven process. And yes, it has to do with financial planning, but it has to do about acquiring new clients. That's how you grow. And it's true for every professional. But it inspires me to see that they are so committed to, as they call, do business, do life, and the double win, that they're not willing to compromise on that. And yet, all that's happened is their business has scaled like a rocket ship. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Do us a favor, review this episode, rate it on wherever you listen to podcasts. That'll help us to get the word out, to let the podcast rise in the rankings so that it gets more visibility. And we would be eternally grateful if you just take 2 minutes to do that. It's easier than you think, and it's so helpful. We'll see you next week.